this is definitely a niche passion of mine. To be honest, I grew up in, Dallas, Texas, around the area. My father was a football coach, like not exactly, I wasn't exactly propped up to be a classical ballet dancer. I had to kind of do a lot of the research on my own.
Yeah.
And I kind of knew that from a young age. Like I was already thinking, and I'm not really sure what was the impetus behind that. Just like I always knew I didn't want to do the exact same thing as what was kind of being spoon-fed to me in my surroundings.
Welcome to Outside the Bell Curve, a show for those who just can't seem to color inside the lines. I'm Heather, and I talk to friends with cool jobs, wild stories, and a habit of choosing the unexpected. From creative freelancers to digital nomads and anything and everything in between, this is a space for redefining success on your own terms. So let's explore what it looks like to live outside the bell curve. A little background. I started this project after traveling and living in many different places from New York to Australia and spots in between, fully accepting that the traditional career, lifestyle, what have you, never has and never will be quite a fit for me. Fortunately, through my own endeavors and truly just chatting with strangers, I've met some pretty talented creatives, entrepreneurs, you name it, who have fully embraced creating their own opportunities, crafting their own bespoke lifestyles, and coming up with some sometimes grandeur plans. This is simply me being curious, seeing how they make it all work, finding careers and lifestyles that work for them. So if you're keen for a little sometimes scatterbrain chat, but definitely a dose of inspiration, then welcome and thank you for joining. Today we have Emily Paige. She is a New York-based professional dancer, creative agent, choreographer, and casting agent. I think I already said that. And yeah, so she's really killing it in NYC, and I'm going to let her tell us a little bit about herself and what she's doing at the moment.
Yeah, so thank you, Heather. I started as a professional classical ballet dancer. I have been in and out of the city now for 13 years. I graduated from the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater program in Fordham University. So I switched into like modern contemporary dance, and then I went on to dance both in like classical and contemporary dance companies as well as in TV and film for about 10 years. I was represented by Block Talent, did the whole TV, film, commercial dance, music videos. Then I also was performing with like classical and contemporary companies. I danced with like Staatstheater Theater Castle in Germany. I danced in Russia, danced with different modern companies here in the US. And then, obviously COVID happened and I started kind of thinking outside of the box, what else I might want to do. Really, like, I think my story is much more about like the transition, like what do you do after maybe you're done performing? And that's kind of what I've been exploring the past few years. And I completely had kind of I wouldn't say it's a like a 180, because I am still in tangent to the performing arts, but I work now primarily in the business side, working with corporations and implementing talent into, whether that's experiential marketing or, pop-up events, live production, etc. And just really trying to find ways to put talent in new spaces. And that's what I do at the entertainment division I now work at. I've been working for 2 years with them. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. That's great. And that's a lot. So I'm curious for you.
Mm-hmm.
You grew up in Texas.
Yes, I did.
Correct me if I don't want to. I feel like, is Texas known for their contemporary and ballet?
Definitely not. This is definitely a niche passion of mine. To be honest, I grew up in, Dallas, Texas, around the area. My father was a football coach, like not exactly, I wasn't exactly propped up to be a classical ballet dancer. However, I did get into ballet pretty young, and there is some good training if you, I think with anything, if you want it, you can find it. And so I was able to get into, really good ballet school in the Dallas Metroplex and, training. And, as I grew up, I kind of was like, oh, this is, maybe something I'm good at. And I did start auditioning outside of Texas and training with programs like American Ballet Theater Summer Intensives. And I trained with Joffrey Ballet in their trainee program in Chicago. So, I kind of was setting myself up at a very young age, like maybe Texas is not for me. And, there are great dance programs in Texas and companies. But, when I started looking at what my, art life, what I wanted to be, it only made sense, like New York or LA. And then with dance, New York City is just the absolute mecca for that. So, I kind of narrowed my eyes on auditioning for programs like Juilliard, NYU Tisch, and Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. And so, got one of the three, and that was kind of like set everything in motion, and getting into that BFA program.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then what was it like moving to New York as an 18-year-old and being just thrown into the world of professional dance coming from your background? Because I'm assuming compared to everybody else that you graduated high school with, what
Right.
you were doing was entirely different. And people probably looked at you and thought, that's
She's
scary.
crazy.
Yeah, she's crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think, it's so interesting, especially in the public school systems across the country. Not always art isn't always propped up as, such a professional career endeavor. So I did feel like I had to do a lot of research on my own. When you go to, looking at colleges or looking at what kind of career, you do these career days with your school, and you're looking at careers locally, there's just not any exposure really to what else might be out there, or even entrepreneurship, or like thinking outside of the box in that way. And so I got very lucky because I had a counselor at the time who I kind of had expressed my passions for, and it was just so new to her that she was like, wait, like, how cool is this to have a, high schooler looking into dance, dance professional, a BFA program. And so, she was really a great aid. And so I'm really grateful looking back. Like, that was awesome to have someone kind of advocate for me. And, I did audition for a ton of different ballet programs and companies. And, but yeah, when I landed on, Alvin Ailey and coming to New York, that's also the name. Alvin Ailey is, so world renowned and so big in American culture. So that was a very big deal, coming from a small town in Texas. But I think, I just look back and I think it takes a lot of kind of, you have to look and I had to kind of do a lot of the research on my own.
Yeah.
And I kind of knew that from a young age. Like, I was already thinking, and I'm not really sure what was the impetus behind that. Just like, I always knew I didn't want to do the exact same thing as what was kind of being spoon-fed to me in my surroundings. I wish I had a better answer of like what, how I navigated that. I think that's always interesting, but I think it was just kind of like within me, because I was like, well, I know that dance is out there. How do I get there? And some of it was trial and error, a lot of fumbling. There's a lot of things I would have done differently. There's a lot of rooms I would have gone into differently. But I think that's also kind of the beauty of, trying something new, or like risking it. And, is like just going for it.
Yeah.
So.
And how was your family? Like, were they supportive of that, or did that terrify them, thinking, oh, our daughter's not going to have because to be honest, like, right, like dancing isn't a secure career.
No, not at all.
Like, you could get injured and you're done.
Yes. And that's a lot of what, you see now, even in my reasons for transitioning to some of the work I do now. It's always there, right? You're always one wrong step away from getting an injury or something happening. And I think it's very important to like talk about those things. And I don't think there's a lot of exposure to like, you can have an incredible career as a musician or dancer, but I do think it's important to talk about how to set yourself up behind the scenes to make that happen. For me, what seemed right at the time when I was young with my parents, I think they were just so supportive of it, but they also didn't have the resources to really know, what that would look like long term. And so, I took it upon myself to do a double major as security from blanket for myself. Like, I felt confident I could manage the workload balance of being in a BFA, obviously a conservative kind of like high level dance program, while also double majoring. And that's something, Alvin Ailey and Fordham, really worked together to have for dancers. I think a lot of programs now have that at the college level, as well as, dancers who maybe don't go the college route and are like, I'm going to go straight into a company. They tend to, do night courses or get online schooling. So there's ways for everyone to kind of get that degree if you want that.
Yeah.
Which I think I did because I always kind of thought dance was going to be one chapter for me, not the whole book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that kind of like knowing yourself and having that foresight really helped me. Just kind of like coming into it with that. But no, my surroundings did not, they were okay with me, going this route because I had, gotten into Ailey and things had aligned for me. But I think advocating for myself was very hard because it's like, what are you going to do when you turn 30 and your knees don't work anymore? And you're like, well,
Something.
Yeah. And, now with sports medicine too, dancers are dancing so much longer than you would think. So.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even consider that. Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, you look at NFL players playing well into their 30s. And so I think just across the board, the idea of being, whether you're an athlete or a performance artist or a musician, you think about these career timelines. And I think we don't talk enough about like what happens when the timeline maybe comes to a close. So that's really what I've spent the last, years kind of thinking about and restructuring. And now even in my career as an agent, we work in ways to get talent in maybe new rooms. And that opens also opportunities and doors for people as well, outside of just like one, branch of performance.
So taking it back, what did that transition feel like? Because you've expressed before, like you've danced to the pinnacle, like you've danced in Russia, you've danced in Germany. Did you get to a point, tell me about those experiences and then tell me when you got to the point where you thought, I've done what I came to accomplish and it's ready for me to move on to this next chapter.
Sure. I think, there's that quote that's like, you're only as good as your next show,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was Ben Affleck that said that.
Okay.
Like, you're only as good as like your next job, like the next movie you book or the next show. And I think that always resonated with me. Like I always was like, this was great, but now what else can I do? Mm-hmm. And that always kept me inspired. Like I danced for a company and, I did a lot of short-term contracts. I never stayed in one company, which is also not necessarily the most standard dance background. Like I had a lot of different interests. I wanted to try a lot of different things. I liked dancing in music videos. I liked doing TV film. I liked modeling. I liked dancing on stage. So I was kind of all over the place. Mm-hmm. And that made it, I think, a little hard for me to be like, I'm going to do just one thing. But what was really exciting about that is I got so much exposure to so many things and to so many rooms that I think at a certain point I finally kind of was like, I think like I'm good. I think I've done a lot and I could do another 10 years of this, or I could maybe be happy with where I've landed and try something totally different. And I think that was like very just aligned with my personality of like, I never did one style of dance. I never did one, job. And so it kind of made sense that I would have this epiphany, like I'm good with where I've ended. Yeah. And, it was about 2 years ago, a year and a half, I had moved back from Europe. I'd been dancing during COVID in Germany at a Staatstheater. I came back and I did 2 seasons with the National Opera at the Kennedy Center. And it's just such a beautiful theater. It's such a great job. You're under, obviously, the branch of AGMA and the union. And I just felt like that was a very good stopping point for me. I was like, if I'm going to go down, might be at like a beautiful theater of, the National, like Kennedy Center felt like a good stopping point for me. So, and again, I could have done probably 10 more seasons and, continue to audition and be on the grind in New York City. But it just I feel like, it felt like a good landing point. Of course, there's like, I would have loved to do this. I would have loved to dance at this job. And I would have loved to land that role. Like there's so many things. But, and who's to say, like, I won't just like, it won't call to me again. In like 20 years, I'm back on stage. Like, who knows? But like, I think it was just like a good landing point to pivot. And I felt like it's important for me to feel in control rather than like, my career drive me, which I think sometimes can happen, especially if you start getting to a point where maybe you're aging out or you're maybe not performing at the height of your career. And I didn't want to get to a point where I was there.
Yeah.
And
And tell me this, I know you choreograph as well. Do you have a preference between dancing on stage and choreographing for the stage? Or it just depends?
Yeah, that's like, so it's like a toss up. I love choreographing. Obviously, I feel a certain connection to being on stage and performing. I love being in other people's works. I love being you're kind of in that bubble of being a student, right? You're always learning, performing. But I think like, I've always approached choreography from the point of the client or from the point of the show or the production. And in working like that, I find it interesting because it's like a puzzle that I'm putting together, putting together the performers, putting together what the space needs or what the show calls for. And so I really liked approaching choreography in that way. Cool. And I think that has also, it's kind of more aligned with where I'm going on my journey than staying just on the stage. So I think it's different. It flexes different muscles.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's great to perform, but like, and that get that high, but like choreography is a very satisfying feeling to, create and see it play out in real time,
Did you feel a big difference between being an artist in the States and being an artist in Europe?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was a big part of why even during COVID, I moved to Europe. A lot of arts is state funded throughout Europe, and you can find, you can have a lifestyle that is more easily accessible as an artist, I think, just in general. Because things are state funded, you can be a dancer living a fairly comfortable life, given that you have health care, you have benefits, working in contracts that are typically 3 years plus, so you're a little bit more of a stable life. That being said, one can also argue that in a society like the US and very capitalistically driven, it's like, only the best art wins. There's a reason certain shows go to Broadway and stay on Broadway and others flop. There's a reason certain movies are box office hits and others aren't. And so I think like, there's also that of like the best wins,
Yeah.
And so I think some people can also be drawn to that. And you have just the entire, like the hub of the fact that like New York City is such a melting pot of the arts, and LA as well. And so we kind of have these hubs that just are incubators for like the best things to grow.
Yeah.
And then that's not to say they don't grow in others. I mean, there's some of the best artists in the world are in the UK and, France and Germany and throughout the world. Like, I just think it's interesting. And I'm speaking about dance companies primarily, but it's because they're state funded,
Yeah.
And because there's countries that fund the arts, you have great art. I think the U.S., obviously, if we had more funding, we would also be competing with some of those great companies, great opera houses in the same way.
And then it would maybe be more accessible to more kids in different communities.
Exactly. In general, I mean, you're not going to the opera in, Grapevine, Texas, And I just think when you have access to an opera house in every single city across a country, or, a dance company or music or opera orchestra, it just makes, the idea of being an artist not such an anomaly, like a far off concept. It makes it, I also think as a whole, the culture is more appreciative of the arts, of the importance of it in community. And I think that, is kind of missing in parts of how the US has.
Yeah. I think it is a really far off concept because like I grew up in Arizona, and even my friends who grew up in Missouri or other places.
Yeah.
You see these people on TV or in the ballets when they maybe tour around the country. And I always just thought that you were born into that. Like I was like, I don't know how people become an actor on
that.
TV. Yeah, how do you become that? Because it's not, you don't learn about that in school, and it's not something that comes to career day. It's not a viable college option that you're told is a viable college option.
It's not at all. Yeah.
So you just don't know about it, so you don't pursue it.
Yeah, especially if we're like kind of targeting like the general US, the Midwest. Like, how do you go from, seeing things on TV to like having access to them? And again, there are outreach programs. I know Alvin Ailey has done a ton of work to have outreach programs. But again, that's only one company. There's only so much work they can do.
Yeah.
It really starts at the state level and with where funding is being allocated within a state, within cities, and then like how that trickles down to, do you have accessible arts programs in, throughout like, you're out of, what is that, like outside of school care and things like that, and
extracurriculars
and things like that. And, a lot don't.
Yeah.
So then when you're, you hit an age where you're like, oh, I'm really interested in being, this, and a career counselor might be like, that's insane.
Yeah.
You're not going to do that.
It's not going to happen for
you. You're going to go to state school, you're going to get a degree in accounting, and that's it. And you call it a day, which is totally fine. But do you think there's a lot of people who maybe have an interest and just aren't able to figure out how to pull it together?
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting now, though. One thing I was saying to someone the other day was like, if you have a niche thing you like, there's an audience for it.
Yeah.
And so I think we've learned that through social media, that there is really audiences for everything. And so I think if anyone feels called to be like, I have this idea or this thing, like, I think there's a lot more access now with social media to get opportunity to exercise that, or maybe connect with someone who might have an interest as you, and then learn from them. Even during COVID, we learned this. Like, I was taking lessons of Tai Chi and Qigong on Zoom with masters in Europe and Canada from my bedroom in Texas, and you're like, what a cool concept that we now have kind of opened the gap of accessibility in that way with online courses.
Yeah.
If there's something that calls to you, you really can find access to it. So, if you don't have your, Qigong community in Missouri,
which I think is so good. You sound like you're really passionate about the accessibility of dance and these different art explorations. And I do want to get to what you're doing now because it's awesome, but I do want to follow up. Is this something that you would consider pursuing down the road as far as like stepping into that role of making it more accessible for people?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was kind of when I was exiting dance, I had taken a lot of meetings with different, even like the American Guild of Musical Artists, the unions. I was very interested. I don't have a background in law, but you typically would maybe want a degree in law just to help with advocation. But I have always thought, there is definitely a gap in our system that could be filled, and there's a lot of opportunity there, especially whether that's in, nonprofit organizations, arts access. I've kind of now with my career taken it to how can I get, advocate for artists to be in more high-paying jobs, whether that's like a corporate, event or a commercial campaign, etc. But I think there's also, that's the next step would be like advocating for more access to arts, across public schools and systems. And of course there are great, art and curricular. I haven't, touched back with like where we're at in the public school system. But there's also so many systems where there isn't an arts program or a strong arts teacher or a strong, access to piano teachers and things like that. And so I do think there's a lot of room there for development across the country.
So tell us what you're doing now and how you made that transition from where you were to what you're doing now.
Yeah, I feel very lucky that it kind of happened organically. I had been working in production dancing for a company for about 8 years throughout my career as a dancer. And the founder and CEO of the company I work for now had reached out about casting more dancers and kind of taking over that branch. So I started just casting dancers for like private events and gigs and productions. And over the last 2 years, we've opened an entertainment division within the company that I have, kind of taken over as head. And we've really worked to try to implement and showcase how you could add in musicians or dancers or influencers. I mean, we work a lot with brand ambassadors, actor models into kind of any, the heart of any experiential marketing, a live event, a campaign. Some people, movement direction on a set.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are like, oh, I want 3 models. And it's like, oh, you could also have 2 dancers as well and like hype up the campaign or whatever. And so it's just like kind of, advocating, especially when we're in that brainstorm incubation process with a client talking about like, oh, we want this, this, and this. And it's like, great. And we also have a musician or, whatever. And we do a lot of specialty talent as well, which is nice. So it's like we could also add in a juggler or a magician. Like it's kind of fun just to try to find ways to throw in talent when you can. And I think people then really love it, but they don't always know what that looks like because we're in a society where we're like, well, we want a band, we just want a band at this thing, or, oh, well, we want some pretty people for, this campaign. And so it's really just trying to pitch the idea of like where else we could go with an idea. And I think a lot of times when you have people in maybe a corporate setting that are like, we want something cool, but we don't know how to act, exactly what that looks like.
Yeah.
So we kind of work as the bridge between the two.
You're there to explore those options.
Yeah.
And
it's a little different than a standard casting or talent agency because, again, a lot of talent agents are working specifically representing the talent and working directly with, already with, a film or a production company, casting directors, etc. We're kind of not working in that realm. We're working, visa needs, talent for a forum. What does that look like, and kind of going directly to the consumer or the client.
Yeah, that's so fun because, like you said, it really ties in everything that you've done throughout your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just understanding, what's been great for me is understanding the gig life economy of an artist. And then now being able to advocate for like what's the right rates for certain things and what would that look like to hire ice skaters for a private production, pop-up one night only event, or, a Disney, 3-week experiential show where you have all kinds of performers coming in and just kind of understanding and just getting to also be creative. I mean, that's the muscle I loved about choreography that I now get to use in some of these kinds of, advocating like, oh, but you could also add this and what about this? And, or working with production companies, putting on shows in New York or parties or whatever it be, And
do you feel like the industry, I guess specific to casting these types of events, do you think it's moving in a positive direction as far as pay rates for artists?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I also think post-COVID, it's been interesting because I think there's always now, especially going to be a need for live events and community because we do want that. And so I do think, if a client is trying, you look at Coachella where you have all these major brand activations and parties. I just think people want to feel community. People want to go to events. People want to be outside. People want to be with people. And so I think like there's been a lot of need and desire and request for these kinds of, experiential settings to happen. And I'd like to think that's going to continue to grow. I mean, of course, we never know what's going to happen. Things can always change, but I think then we would just redirect. But I do think as our society is becoming more technology driven and, kind of geared online. We're working in remote settings. I think that actually drives a greater need for that event, for that community project,
Exactly.
And so I think that's really exciting. And then in terms of like rates and things for artists, I do think, it's important for agents across all fields to be advocating for higher rates and like proper pay. And I do feel like it's heading in that direction.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And it's part of you, people like you who are advocating and saying, this is the standard rate and we're going to keep it that way and only keep going up from there.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I have 2 last big questions for you.
Yeah.
If you had a piece of advice
Mhm.
to give somebody listening, whether they're an artist or just discovering new things, and it can be career related or food related, dating related, whatever you feel like, what would be a single piece of advice that you would give on Monday?
I think don't be afraid to reach out and ask for things. So many times in my career, a dancer or an artist would be like, how did you get that? How did you connect with that person? And I was like, I sent an email. I wrote them a message on Instagram. Like I called, I reached out twice. Like I think we sometimes get so pigeonholed into the idea of the exact structure of like A to B has to be, and it actually there's so many ways to connect with people. I think, of course, like be organic and be authentic, but I do think sometimes, especially when you're coming from a more structured classical background, such as trained musician, you go like, these are the steps, there's not one correct path. And I think like, the reward is for those bold enough to take it.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that is where people get a little held up. They're like, wait, what? No, I can't just text that, email that director and be like, I love your work. Can I dance for you? But yes, you can. I mean, I did,
Yeah.
Proof is in the pudding,
Yeah, I've had many friends who've done that. And that's actually my theme of the year is just advocating for yourself, because you never know until you just ask.
Yeah.
Someone might tell you no. It's the same as like if you were going to go hit on someone.
Right.
You just have to ask.
Exactly. I think this is like, even, when we get nervous in dating or whatever, and it's like, you don't know until you put yourself out there. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you get your answer, it's like, there you have your answer. Now you move to the next thing.
Yeah. You can stop thinking about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. What song do you have on repeat right now?
Oh my gosh.
What'd you listen to on the train today?
I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure I've had Bluest Flame by Selena Gomez on repeat. Her new album is such a bop.
Okay.
It's like Call Me When You Break Up and Bluest Flame.
What? Can you hum a tune? I don't know it.
I'm not humming a tune.
I'll look it up later.
But you look it up and you're going to be like, oh, she's in a... Yeah? She's ready for summer.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm ready for summer.
Yes.
Great. I'm going to listen to it today.
You should.
Perfect.
I think you'll be really happy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today and teaching us a ton.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It was a blast. I hope some people learn some things about the arts world, and
I'm sure as heck they will.
Transition out of it.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.